In a small suburban town nestled in the hills, there lived a couple named Sarah and David. They had been in a relationship for a few years and decided to take their commitment to the next level by moving in together. David worked as a dedicated teacher in a nearby town, a mere 15-minute train ride away, while Sarah had the privilege of working remotely from the comfort of their cozy apartment. One late January morning, a trivial argument sparked a heated fight between Sarah and David. The disagreement grew out of proportion, and emotions ran high. They reached a point where they decided to give each other the silent treatment for an entire day. No texts, no calls, no communication whatsoever. The next day dawned, and the tension in their home was palpable. As Sarah lay in bed, engrossed in her work, she couldn't help but replay the events of the previous day in her mind. The details of the argument had already started to fade from memory, but the emotional residue lingered, making her feel both remorseful and eager for a resolution. It was a Tuesday, and she knew that David usually finished his classes around 1 p.m. on Tuesdays, so she anticipated his arrival around 2:30 p.m. Around 1 p.m., Sarah heard the familiar creak of the front door opening and closing. Surprised, she thought to herself, I guess he's home an hour early today. David occasionally skipped his last class, so the thought of him arriving ahead of schedule didn't raise any alarm bells. Sarah mentally prepared herself for the awkward post-fight conversation, anticipating how they would break the ice and mend their wounded relationship. Lying in bed, Sarah continued her work, waiting for David to enter the bedroom and change his clothes as he typically did. The closed bedroom door acted as a barrier between her and the rest of the apartment. She habitually wore earplugs while working, but even with muffled sounds, she could discern the heavy footsteps of David moving around the living room. If she hadn't been so absorbed in the aftermath of their fight, she might have noticed something peculiar about the slow and deliberate pace of the footsteps, or how David seemed to be spending an unusually long time in the living room. However, consumed by the dramatic tension, she remained oblivious to these subtle hints, her focus solely fixed on David's eventual arrival. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the bedroom door creaked open, revealing a mere glimpse of what lay beyond. Sarah turned her head, ready to greet David with a half-hearted smile, prepared to acknowledge the awkwardness that had consumed them for the past 24 hours. But to her surprise and confusion, the door only opened a few inches before being silently closed once again. It wasn't David who had pushed open the door, it was a woman's hand adorned with red nail polish that she saw gripping the doorknob. The mysterious intruder had made their presence felt yet chose not to enter the room. Caught off guard, Sarah's heart raced, and she instinctively ripped out her earplugs, freezing in the doorway for a few fleeting seconds. Her mind raced, attempting to make sense of the situation. Was it David's mother or sister? Could they have come over unannounced? She quickly dismissed the possibility that it might be the landlady, as she had never entered their apartment without prior permission. Concluding that it must be a family member, Sarah gathered her courage, opened the bedroom door, and stepped into the living room. To her surprise, there was no one to be found, but the room was engulfed in a heavy cloud of women's perfume. It was at that moment that Sarah's senses kicked back into gear, and she realized the improbability of the situation. David's mother and sister had never visited before and did not possess keys to their apartment. The realization hit her like a tidal wave, a stranger had invaded their home. Fear enveloped her, and she retreated to the safety of the bedroom, hastily shutting the door behind her. Shaking uncontrollably, Sarah stood on the apartment's balcony, despite the biting cold January rain, and dialed David's number in a panic. Trembling, she relayed the unnerving encounter to him, her voice quivering with anxiety. David, alarmed by the situation, reassured her and instructed her not to move. He promised to contact the police immediately. Within minutes, the piercing wail of sirens echoed through the quiet neighborhood as law enforcement officers raced to their location. Swiftly, they conducted a thorough search of the apartment, scouring every nook and cranny for any sign of the intruder. However, by the time they arrived, the mysterious visitor had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a lingering sense of unease. the incident left Sarah and David bewildered and on high alert. Oddly enough, nothing appeared to be missing from their apartment. Even the jar full of money they kept near the entrance remained untouched. It was as if the intruder had a specific objective that was yet to be unraveled. Puzzled by the lack of a tangible motive, Sarah and David couldn't help but question the intentions of the stranger who had invaded their sanctum. For a few days, they tried to convince themselves that it was merely their nosy landlady breaching their privacy. Sarah began to regain a semblance of normalcy, believing that their security concerns were unfounded. Nevertheless, they demanded that the landlady change the locks as a precautionary measure to restore their peace of mind. When the landlady and her husband arrived to change the locks, they made a chilling discovery. As they examined the doorknob area, a scratched square revealed itself, evidence that someone had used tools to break into the apartment. This revelation only intensified the unease that had settled upon Sarah and David, affirming their suspicion that this was not a mere case of curiosity but something far more sinister. A day or two later, David hesitantly confessed something to Sarah, prefacing it with a plea for her not to freak out. He revealed that the orange kitchen scissors were missing. Panic immediately flooded Sarah's veins as she frantically tore through every inch of their apartment, searching for the vanished scissors. Despite 6 long months of searching, the scissors remained elusive, adding an eerie layer to the already perplexing situation. The whole ordeal left Sarah and David feeling unnerved, as though they were trapped in a spine-chilling mystery. A stranger had broken into their meticulously arranged lives, but their motive remained a haunting enigma. Why would someone invade their home without taking anything of value? The unanswered questions lingered, casting a shadow of unease over their once tranquil existence. As Sarah reflected on that fateful day, she couldn't help but feel a profound sense of relief that she never came face to face with the intruder. The unknown perpetrator had left an indelible mark on their lives, forever reminding them of the fragility of their sense of security. The hope of never encountering the person who opened that door remained a fervent wish, an ardent desire to maintain the barrier between the familiar and the unknown.